Aaliyah, it's going to count as, there we go. Hey everybody, wherever you are watching this video, if you're watching with us live or if you're watching our recorded version, any information that we give, medical or legal, provided by the experts is as of today's date, April 11th, 2023. For further information, you will receive an email if you've registered with the contact details of Create Fertility and Cindy Wasser and Hope Springs Fertility Law. We're just going to give people another couple moments to join us, and then we'll get started. Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Leah Swanberg. I am the founder of Canadian Fertility Consulting and Egg Helpers, and I'm so excited tonight to talk about the intricacies of surrogacy and egg donation when people are looking to Canada or are located in Canada and feel overwhelmed by how to get started, how to select a fertility clinic, how to select a fertility lawyer, how to work independently with a sister, cousin, friend as your surrogate, which is my favorite journey, how to find an egg donor, whether within your social circle, within your family, or through an agency. And when we talk about that, I often get these questions, well, you run an agency, why would you send us somewhere else? Why would you send us, to find someone? And for me, the answer is really my job, if I am a fertility consultant, is to give advice. And sometimes that advice is to work with your neighbor who has offered to be your surrogate, or for same-sex male couples, often it is the sister of one of the partners using the sperm of the other partner. And it's absolutely such a wonderful journey to watch unfold. And I love being on the sidelines and cheering people on. And yet many people don't have that option. And so we do work with them to find an amazing egg donor and surrogate in Canada. We work in all provinces and territories, and we are so hopeful for all of our clients. And we are often always partnering with amazing people. And tonight, my guests are Cindy Wasser from Hope Springs Fertility Law and Dr. Lee Brack, the medical director of Create Fertility. And so we are going to get right to it. I have questions that people have sent in advance. And, the first one, I guess, is for me. It is, what is the difference between gestational and traditional surrogacy? And why would you select one or suggest one or the other? And for me, gestational surrogacy is the path that I took as a surrogate. And we feel most comfortable legally. And we also looked to our surrogates, and we are a surrogate-led program, which means our surrogates come to us, letting us know who they would like to help and how they would like to help them. And thus far it has been, I'd like to help people and as a gestational surrogacy or as a gestational surrogate. And that has really worked for us in our program over 17 years. The next question that I often get around egg donation is, how do I find a donor? I've exhausted all avenues that I have within my life. And so I need to find someone else, and how will I trust this person? And so I want to talk a little bit about egg donation, guys, before we sort of go into surrogacy, because it's often the first step. So when people contact our surrogacy agency and they need eggs from a donor, we send them always to Egg Helpers, which is our sister company. And when they're doing their consultation and their intake, we talk about a lot of things. And one of the first places we send people is to a clinic. And when we send them to a clinic, it's so that they can make sure that they can participate in the genetic creation of their child, and that, an egg donor makes sense because they have sperm to use, and that, that they've been told by someone for some reason they need an egg donor. And so for us, when we send people to Create, that means their donor has also gone to Create. And for us, what is so important is that any donors that we work with or have in our database, they have gone through a psychosocial assessment, exploring why they are interested in egg donation. What is their motivation? What is their sort of family of origin story? What brought them to becoming a donor? How they may handle the hormones and medication, who they have in their corner for support during this process, and are they able to commit to a couple of weeks of daily, every other day, every third day appointments as they go through the medical process before retrieval. And that for us is really the first and one of the most important points. Secondly, they meet with a nurse practitioner who really gathers their health information. They've filled out a health profile form that you, as intended parents, will review online. Um, and further to that, we want to have checks and balances in place because sometimes people fill out the application and maybe they haven't thought about something, or the nurse practitioner asks a question that evokes a response that maybe doesn't necessarily match that application. And so we want to know before you meet with them that something else came up um, that doesn't necessarily preclude them from being a donor, but is important information. And then they move to the clinical process with Dr. Liebrecht. And so I'm going to have Dr. Liebrecht talk a little bit about what makes a good egg donor. When we tell you a donor is approved for a specific package that you've selected, what does that mean, Dr. Liebrecht, in terms of how do you know that a donor is going to have a lot of eggs or a lower amount of eggs? Like all of that stuff would be great to know.
So that's a great question. And we need to assess the donor in many ways to be able to figure out if she is a good candidate to be a donor. Firstly, one of the most important things is that she's healthy and that she has no medical problems that are going to affect her ability to donate. And one of the things that we really look at very carefully is what is her ovarian reserve, because ultimately you need to have enough eggs to create embryos to be able to have a baby from her eggs. And so there's a test that we do. It's called anti-Müllerian hormone, or AMH. And those of you who are familiar with this area or becoming familiar will know that test. And we have a sort of cutoff that it must be above that a certain level in order to qualify to be a donor. And especially when we're looking at same-sex male couples where we want to have embryos, in some cases where you're going to be providing sperm for each of you, we want to make sure we can have embryos for each of you so you can each have a baby with your own sperm and having a common egg donor. So those are the types of donors that we want to have that have a large number of eggs that will be able to provide that and have the best chance of having a family of your dreams, of having that type of a situation. So there are many things we do. We do a full physical examination. We do blood testing, ultrasound. We look carefully at their ovaries, and we really want to make sure we have the best person to provide eggs for you for your journey.
Can you talk a little bit about genetic testing? A lot of people that we sort of begin with start talking about how do we know that there isn't a genetic issue that she will pass on to our child? We're really concerned about that. Is there a way to test that ahead of time?
There is. So there's two ways to approach genetic testing. In the past, we often just did very specific tests for a specific ethnicity, like Caucasians, we'd be looking at the most common condition, cystic fibrosis, Black would be sickle cell disease, and so on. But now there's new testing that's called carrier screening, where you're testing, hundreds of different genes to see what that person carries. And almost all of us carry something in our genes that we get from our parents. But that carrying of a gene does not affect our health, but it's only when the other person providing an egg will also carry the same thing. So if the donor is tested for those genes and you're also tested as the provider of sperm, for example, then if you have the same gene in common, then that can affect the baby and could actually have the disease. We can test for those diseases in embryos, and in fact, we have one of the top genetics labs in the world to do that kind of testing in embryos. So if in fact that's the case, let's say you're a heterosexual couple and you have a surrogate, and both of you carry the same gene, and then we would be able to test embryos for that particular disease. But in general, many of our donors are tested for all of these, are screened for all these carrier genes, and we would then obviously test the intended parents to be able to see if there's anything in common.
I had a question about egg donors, and the question that came in was, we are thinking about, working with a donor, and maybe actually this is more of a question for Cindy, that is, listed on a database as a known donor, and we want to know if legally that is as safe as working with an anonymous donor. So I guess that is a legal question, Cindy, for you.
You're muted.
Thank you. In terms of legalities in Canada, there is no difference between a known or anonymous donor. The law in virtually every province and territory specifically states that a donor is not a parent by virtue only of being a donor. So parentage in Canada is based on intention. The sperm donor parent is a donor as well, of course, but he intends to be a parent, so he will be. You could make a donor into a parent by bringing her into your life and sharing your child with her, but in the third party context that we're speaking of, that generally doesn't happen. Zooming with her, sharing pictures, and maybe meeting once or twice a year or something is not going to affect it. So it's more an issue socially of what you think as a parent is best for your children. I have a big bias about that myself towards known, which is what I have. And it's the best thing for my children.
And when people are, listening to this webinar and they live outside of Canada, they're considering egg donation. Cindy, what do they need to consider in terms of the legal process around egg donation? And if they reached out to you, would you know a lawyer in Holland, a lawyer in Norway, a lawyer that could give them that advice? Because I know it's one thing to make a baby, it's another thing to make the baby your own baby once you return to wherever it is you live.
Very good question. Thank you. Yes. When we work with clients who live outside of Canada, usually referenced as foreign clients, we always start with, have you spoken to a lawyer in your country to find out what you have to do when you get off that plane? If you have a baby in Canada, it will automatically be granted Canadian citizenship. That happens by birth. Nothing you have to do. Anyone born here is Canadian. And usually the fastest passport anyone will obtain in Canada will be the Canadian one for the baby. So most foreigners are taking home a Canadian tourist. And we don't see problems when they get off the plane anymore, but they can't stay forever. Usually it's 3 months in the EU. And so they have to speak to a local lawyer to get information about how to provide citizenship in that country so the baby can stay. And usually, again, the first step to giving citizenship is to prove their own parentage, or as many other countries refer to it, filiation. So they are the parents in that country as well. Usually biological connection is required in most other countries.
Excellent. And Dr. Liebrecht, how do you know when the donors donate? Like, is there, obviously I know this answer, but someone asked the question, is there a form that donors sign at your clinic saying, here's my eggs, thank you very much, whether it's known or not, I know these eggs are going to someone and they're not mine anymore?
Yes, absolutely. And that's a consent form that they all sign, saying these are for you to have, to use as you wish, as the intended parents. And once they leave her body, they are your eggs, basically, by law in Canada. And Cindy can also address this, but you then have the right to use those eggs as you wish to have your own family.
And in terms of intended parents, do they sign, even if the eggs are becoming embryos and going into a surrogate, do the intended parents sign a similar form that says, now I own Jenny Smith's 25 eggs, and that's how that sort of transaction happens, outside of having a legal agreement, which we know is also required?
Absolutely. There's a consent that says, I'm receiving these eggs from this person, and now I'm taking over to have children with them, and I basically am not going to disturb the donor who's really donated to me. If there's obviously a known donation, then there will be a relationship. But if it is anonymous, then it's basically kept that way.
And if I could just add, it's important to note that that is federal legislation in Canada, which means it takes precedence over any donor contract that says anything else, any separate agreement that says anything else between the donor, the clinic, the agency, or the recipient. So once those consents are signed and say what they say, that's it. They would have to be changed if there is to be a change in the future.
Excellent. Thank you. And in terms of, now we have the eggs, we're creating the embryos. When people ask us, they're comparing clinics and they say this clinic has this great lab in the US and they take some cells from this embryo and they send them there for testing. And it to me sounds like a piece of scotch tape over an egg, raw egg. I always think of that in my head. Do you have that capability at Create to send these cells somewhere else for testing? Like, what is that about?
So, we are one of the a few clinics that has our own in-house genetic lab, which I said was one of the top genetic labs in the world to do this testing. So we do it in-house in our own clinic, and we provide every type of genetic testing that might be required for those embryos to be able to create the healthiest baby. You can't test for every single thing, but you can test for the most common thing, which is the number of chromosomes the embryo has. And that's called aneuploidy, when there's a wrong number of chromosomes. Normal people have 46 chromosomes, and I'm sure many of you have heard of Down syndrome, which is an extra chromosome 21. That is easily detected in embryos to avoid transferring embryos like that, or embryos that are destined to either have a miscarriage or just a failure because they're just not compatible with life. So we can easily test for that, and we do that routinely when we do egg donation, because we know we've tested thousands and thousands of embryos from young egg donors in their 20s and early 30s, and it turns out about 30% on average of those embryos will be abnormal and not be capable of producing a baby. So we can eliminate those embryos and only put embryos that have passed that screening in order to provide to transfer an embryo that's tested normal.
Okay, so we have these embryos, they're beautiful, they're tested. Let's move on to the surrogate. Why is, I know the answer because I work with you all the time, but sell me on Create. Tell me why Create is the clinic that everyone listening to should come to.
Well, I think there's really a myriad of reasons, but I'm going to talk about it, the ones that I think are really important. First of all, we are the largest by far in Canada third-party program, and I've spent my career making that program a priority for our patients that require that kind of service. And we are one of the largest in the world, actually. But we do want to provide, even despite the fact that we're so large, a personalized touch to our care. So we have all of our nurses. You will have a specific nurse that will be looking after your case. We have over 15 nurses that work in our program, and all of them are assigned certain patients in their sort of group of patients they look after. So you'll know who you can contact if you have any issues or any questions specifically. And even if they're off on a weekend or holiday, we provide nurses that will be able to answer your questions even every single day of the week, 365 days a year. The other thing we have is these nurse practitioners, and actually we now have family doctors also that will screen your donor and your surrogate, and they can do that quite quickly, so we can get that part of the screening done very rapidly. We also have counselors. We have 4 counselors in our program that are dedicated to doing psychosocial counseling and to really give you guys very important psychosocial information about having a baby through egg donation and surrogacy in Canada. And I think it's really important, very informative information that you're going to get to be able to help you through this process. And really, they'll be telling you things that you may not have thought of, and I think that's really, really important. We also have one of the top labs in the IVF lab in the world as well, and we have very specialized testing, and we are on the cutting edge. We do a lot of research. I'm a full professor at the University of Toronto, and all of our doctors are academic doctors that have affiliation with the University of Toronto, and so we really provide cutting edge treatment. We also have very interesting programs in terms of financial. We have a guarantee program of one baby, a guarantee of two babies, and if you're a same-sex male couple, we have something called guarantee 1+1, meaning a guarantee of one baby for each of you, or your money back minus a small administrative fee. So I think that's a very important. It gives you peace of mind. I'm going to spend this money and I'll have a baby, or I'll have my money back. And we obviously want to give you the baby, not the money back. Otherwise, we have a very bad business model. But we really stand by our guarantee to be able to help you have a baby. And our accounting people will be able to provide the details of that, which we don't have time to talk about here. We also provide the ability to have kits that we can send to you in your own country, so you don't have to travel here just to provide sperm. If you're in Australia or very far away from the clinic, Asia or Europe, anywhere, then you can actually have a kit sent to you. You can freeze your own sperm at home using a video that we provide. It makes it very easy to do. Someone just has to draw some blood and you ship it back to our clinic. And during COVID, it worked beautifully when travel was so difficult. Now, many people are coming, but you have the option of having the kit. And I think that those are some of the major things that I would say. In Ontario, one thing we do have available, if you're living in Ontario, is the ability to use the funding program, where you would get some money provided to you by the government to do your IVF cycle.
That's fantastic. I'm gonna brag even more about Create. There are locations across Ontario that surrogates can visit if they live in Ontario. For myself, having built a clinical relationship for 15 years with Create, knowing that the nurses and the staff care like so deeply, and knowing that Dr. Liebrecht, during COVID, really stepped forward to create these sperm shipping kits. And, this is something that no one else did, to ensure that people could continue to build their families during a pandemic, knowing that surrogates were, we had more surrogates sign up during COVID than ever. It was like, I want to help. And so this is something I can help during COVID at home with my family. And it really was just so lovely. Okay, so we have a question. Matthew, what is the process for two fathers donating sperm? Is it possible to have two babies at the same time? So I'm going to answer that from a surrogacy sort of agency process, which would be yes. And the way that happens is to have two surrogates or a tandem journey. We are, a single embryo transfer program. We have a less than 1% multiple pregnancy rate. And that is because we've learned over the years that now labs are so amazing that all you need is one embryo. We also know that twin pregnancies can be unsafe for the woman carrying and can be unsafe if babies are born prematurely. We also know that our Canadian healthcare system can only handle so much. And we really learned that during COVID. And I think we've continued to learn that. And so ensuring the safety of your surrogate is ensuring the safety of your babies. And so single embryo transfer is really the best. And so often we have clients who have two surrogates at the same time carrying, Joe's baby and John's baby, or if it's a heterosexual couple, John and Jenny's babies, at the same time. And it's really fantastic that surrogates are so interested in sort of the connection with other surrogates that it's absolutely possible. And Dr. Liebrecht, I don't know if you want to talk about sort of why we're only transferring one embryo now, because I know when I brought it forward and, we had the conversation and risk versus reward and realizing the chance of bed rest made the cost not really any different.
Yeah. In days gone by, when we weren't doing this routine genetic testing on embryos, we knew that many embryos, like 30%, we know now, were not normal. So we would put more embryos in, thinking that only one might take. But we took the risk of the twin pregnancy. And as you've said very well, twin pregnancies are high risk for the surrogate. We don't want anything to happen to her. She's doing something so wonderful for you to have a child. We never want to have a complication. She has children of her own, and she has to look after her own family. So that's certainly not a good outcome. And we also don't want to have two very premature babies with all kinds of long-term health issues. You don't want to have two handicapped children with long-term health. So having one healthy child at a time is the way to go, and have another baby later. And I should also mention that even if you don't do a tandem journey where you're having the two surrogates at the same time, embryos can be when they're frozen. There's no difference, by the way, between a fresh and frozen in terms of success. And it's, believe it or not, it's been estimated you can keep an embryo frozen up to 10,000 years. So in other words, there's no limit how long you can keep them frozen until you have another child. So if you want to have a child in 2 years, 4 years, believe it or not, recently we had a woman come back 15 years later and had another child. So there's really no limit how long they can be frozen. So that's also important to realize when you're doing this process.
Amazing. And I'll switch it to Cindy in terms of they've got the embryos. We've now found a surrogate either through their own.
I don't want to interrupt you, but I forgot one thing that we should mention.
Yeah.
And that's insurance. That the insurance companies will not insure twin pregnancies in Canada because of this long-term health risk. And babies could be in a NICU and neonatal intensive care for even months. And you can imagine the cost of that. And it's not as much as in the US, but in Canada, it's still a lot of money. And if you don't have insurance, then you don't want to do that because you could really be faced with a huge bill. And I know Leah's had cases like that where it was a really big problem.
Absolutely. The NICU for a baby is $15,000 per day. And if you have twins, that's per baby. And we see that as an average cost across Canada. So we all really work on them. And embryo split, and it's very rare, but that's sort of our 1%. It's actually less than 1%, but we do see that from time to time. So we have embryos, they've been tested, we're looking for a surrogate. If you are looking for a surrogate, creating a biography, creating a video, setting the intentions, making an agreement with yourself, with your partner, so that you can move forward, creating the agreement with your surrogate. It's so important that when you come to this journey, you are authentically who you are. And if that's a quirky weirdo, that's cool. There are surrogates who are quirky weirdos. Like, we just want you to be yourself. We want you to know a couple of things, or we want to know a couple of things. Your surrogate will want to know a couple of things. Do you want to terminate if there's a medical abnormality? That is what I call an immovable value. Do you understand what her lost wages are if a medical abnormality, a medical issue arises that may cause harm to your baby if she continues to work or care for her children? What type of relationship she wants during the process and potentially after. Are you up for that? Those are sort of my key sort of pieces. We really, and where does she live? Can you be registered as parents? If you have no genetic link, if you met during chemotherapy and you are using an egg donor and a sperm donor, don't go to Alberta. They're still behind. They aren't recognizing children born through surrogacy without a genetic connection to the parents. And so, working with an agency or working with a lawyer who can sort of talk you through those pieces is really important. Average wait time, within our agency is 6 to 9 months. And, I suggest if you're open, post on your own Facebook. Networking is huge. We all know videos go viral. TikTok is huge. Share your journey. It's often very vulnerable and can be really hard to do. And doing it, if that is where your surrogate is, do that. You're going to, you're going to find your person there. You may find her there. You may not. but it will allow you to practice leaning into the uncomfortable pieces of surrogacy because there are many. And I'm going to turn it over to Cindy because she has crafted thousands of contracts. She will be able to talk about why you need a contract, why your real estate lawyer shouldn't create your contract, and what pitfalls you want to avoid during the contract phase.
Thanks. So one of the biggest issues I like to explain to my clients, falling in place with what you've just been saying, Leah, is that the relationship between them and the surrogate is of utmost importance to all of us. I think we've all been saying that here tonight. And the contract negotiation process is a place where people suddenly get nervous. Working with lawyers makes everyone nervous. But this isn't the typical negotiation. We're not buying and selling a business where my client wants to get everything he can out of Dr. Liebrack, and Dr. Liebrack wants to get everything he can out of my client, and we're fighting with, tiger lawyers. She's giving you the one thing money cannot buy you, the greatest gift of all. There is no other way for you to get this. And as Leah said, you want to give her everything and her family everything that we legally can to make it comfortable and to show your gratitude. And our surrogates generally in Canada don't ask for compensation. When we've talked to them about changing the model, what they really want is thank you. So within the ambit of the law, we want to make sure you're taking care of all their financial needs and expectations. And our law says essentially anything related to the donation or the surrogacy is an allowable expense. There is a regulation that lists them all, but Health Canada has also said in another document, whatever we've missed, don't worry, if it's reasonably related, it'll be okay. And that's an important document that people forget exists. So there's no cap on their expenses. There's no monetary limit. Although I've never seen a surrogate asking for $1 million. If she had receipts to support it, it would be legal in Canada. It is not illegal for the surrogate or the donor to receive money. It is illegal for the person in Canada to pay it. So it's not illegal for a foreign client to pay a surrogate in Canada directly. But if it's coming through my office in a contract, I'm not doing it. If it's going through Leah's agency to manage the funds, she's not doing it. And if they're going to ask the clinic for some reason to pay their surrogate, they're not doing it. So that's how the law works. It requires for the agency to reimburse the donor or surrogate, they are required to obtain receipts from her for all those expenses. And where there is no logical receipt, like she buys produce in a farmer's market for cash, she must also swear a declaration saying, these were my expenses, same with her transportation log. So then the agency has to keep all those documents for 6 years under law, and then it's all legal. The contract is the place that sets out those expectations. The agency's already discussed it with the surrogate and the IPs. The lawyers go over it with the surrogate to make sure there's no changes. We check with the IPs that they know what's coming, and we put it in the document. In my office, we want it all in the first negotiation round so that it goes smoothly and quickly. And we like to see a contract done within 2 weeks in our office, 3 max. But often we have people whose schedules are busy. So, but we're
And
pretty
Cindy,
fast.
Do you do that, or do you suggest to people that they do that before the surrogate is medically screened? After? What if they do a transfer? Like, where does the legal piece come in?
Every clinic I've spoken to, whether here or in the US, has said it should be done after screening is complete. Because if you spend money on legal fees to do that contract and develop more of a relationship with her, and they find something, unfortunately, that couldn't be seen beforehand, or she didn't even know, then you've lost that money. And so there are some people I know, some lawyers I know, who often suggest that they will do it before screening, and then they may offer to do a second contract if they need another surrogate for free. The problem with that is that life gets in the way. You don't always get that second surrogate. You've already lost your money. It's gone. It's spent. You don't have it. You may be waiting a long time, life may change, and you may need to leave the program altogether and you're not getting those funds back. I don't want to do that to you. I'm going to reimburse anything that we haven't used. So if we haven't drafted the contract, you're going to get most of the retainer back if we don't do it. So it's safer, it's better for the relationship. I think it will avoid further emotional upset by not going through that for nothing. And we're so fast that it doesn't really cause a delay. And even when the clinic says, could you please do this right away so they can make the next cycle, which is in 4 days, we will drop everything in our office and get it done because we have enough lawyers and staff to make that happen. We would prefer the extra time, but we can do that for you because we know how important the anxiety is. I know, having gone through it, that every day feels like a year, so I want to help.
And with that, what would you say for people, sort of a high level, top 5 things to start thinking about even before they get to the legal process of, what 5 things need to be in every contract?
So the homework for the IPs that I give them with my first consultation starts with thinking about your wills. Most people, when they're having a baby, do their wills after they have their baby. But in surrogacy, we have to do it beforehand. If the intended parents foolishly decide to die while their surrogate is pregnant, we have a big problem. Number one, do not die. Don't do anything crazy anymore. But think about it. So get everything together. Your wills are normal wills. We leave everything to each other. But there are extra clauses for surrogacy. We have a surrogate in Canada having our baby. We have a contract with her with obligations financially. Our estate must continue that. There must be, the estate must give that money to the agency. The law in Canada says that if you were alive at the time of transfer, you will be considered the parents. That's in every province. So I can't imagine Dr. Liebrack doing a transfer knowing that you have died, but if you happen to die at the very second and no one told them, we would have that problem. And I would just want to say, in like 40 years, we've never had the parents die. But, so we shouldn't have those problems. So the guardian would act in your shoes. So you need to pick a guardian. Interesting question for you and your guardian is what to do about abortion. If the surrogate is very far along and abortion is not an option, the guardian's taking the children. If the surrogate is only 3 days, a week, maybe people think on a practical note, maybe we should terminate. Their judgment, their call, surrogate has to be on board too. But what if she's more like 14, 15 weeks and she's really feeling this? Will she do that? Would she not do that? Does the guardian know? So I want all those things to be discussed while you're waiting. There's a lot of stuff to do while you're waiting for a match. The second thing to think about is if you're a foreigner, again, to make sure that you have all your ducks in a row for that country. Does your donor have to be known? Is your country developing a registry like Ireland now, where the donor's information will have to go on it most likely? Same with the surrogacy options. What does your country require the agency or us to provide them in terms of what was done in the process? So we have a lot of things for you to think about, but also in terms of the monetary requirements, your budget. Is your surrogate going to be on employment insurance? Does she have access to it? Do you even know what it is? So many Canadians don't understand how it works, let alone our foreigners. So our firm gives you a little summary. What province to think about? How long can you be in Canada? In some provinces, it takes longer than in others. The issue about Quebec right now is that not both parents can go on the birth certificate. It's either the surrogate alone, the biological father alone, or the two of them. There's proposed legislation to change that, but I'm going to guess that's a year or two away. So are you willing to give that up? Because there may be a pool of surrogates waiting to be matched in Quebec for that reason. You might get matched farther. Things to think about and discuss together. What to do with your embryos upon death or divorce. Those are property. Those are important pieces of property. And there are consents that they'll sign at the clinic about that. So all kinds of legal issues to think about in advance.
Absolutely. And I see a question, Brandon Arcurs from Alberta. We are Ontario, will we have issues? I haven't been told any issues until just mentioned now. The issues I mentioned are around having no genetic connection to your child. So if you have used a sperm donor and an egg donor in Alberta, they we're waiting for someone to want to challenge this. I have put my own money forward on several occasions. It's not happened quite yet. Cindy's put her time in as well. We are hoping that the legislation there will be challenged. However, you will, even if there wasn't a genetic connection, we have had that happen. People have gone back to Ontario and registered through Cindy and a court order there. So that is no problem.
Yeah,
I want to
if you're
get
living in Ontario, there's a workaround. It's a bit expensive, but there's a workaround. But if you have a genetic connection, at least one of you, no problem.
I want to get to the next question because we're not out of time, but we still have 20 minutes. We live in Kitchener and already have 4 embryos. We are looking for a surrogate. So just want to know what the process is. We will send you some information. We would love to sort of fill you in on the process. I know that a lot of clinics are not able or interested in doing surrogacy. So it often means moving your embryos, which sounds complicated. It is not. We move embryos around the world, around the country every single day. And, you really want your surrogate to be comfortable. And many surrogates are requesting specific clinics because they've either worked there before, other surrogates have worked there before. They really want to know that they have a counselor there if there is an unsuccessful transfer, if they're doing an ultrasound and there's a loss. That is the number one question I suggest to everyone to ask a clinic. Is there someone there if something goes wrong? Will I see my doctor? Will I be able to schedule my transfer when my doctor's there? Will I, and the list goes on. And every time people are asking me that, I'm like, check. Okay, I want you to be at CREATE because I want you to have access to the physicians there. I want you to have your surrogate or donor have access to a counselor there. I work with a lot of clinics, and I will tell you my 3 adult children are egg donors. My daughter got home yesterday or the day before from an egg donation that Dr. Liebrecht did. And I wouldn't send my kids anywhere else. Like, I feel so confident. And for me, that says everything. I mean, I've been a surrogate, I've been an egg donor, 20 years ago. And so absolutely, please reach out to us. We will help you with that. The next question, I have a question for Leah. Oh, that's me. What's your company's advantage over competitors in the industry, say against surrogacy in Canada online? I don't know. We all do a wonderful job. We all care for our patients, our clients. We all do great work. And, the sort of differentiator with CFC is that we have partnered with Sacred Surrogacy. We offer a different approach around surrogacy. We have spiritual retreats. We look at surrogacy as a rite of passage for birthing people to celebrate and honor. We have self-care boxes that we send that aren't, bubble bath and spa. It goes deeper than that. It's about journaling. It's about meditating. It's about creating a mantra for your journey. This is the most intimate journey you will go on with a stranger, whether you're the surrogate or the intended parent. And how do you deepen that journey so that if something does happen, you've made the agreement with yourself, your partner, and then you can reach in and make that agreement with the surrogate. And Sacred really shows up for people in the in-between, in the waiting, in the hard parts, in the heartbreak. And, part of that is we have counseling available free of charge to our clients throughout the entire journey and up to 6 months post journey, donors, surrogates, intended parents, and people access that. And that is, like, to me, the most important part of our work. Like, I can talk about surrogates all day long. I can talk about surrogacy. I can talk about intended parents and how to build a relationship. But when things fall apart, that is when that in-between space is so important. So, if you're with that agency and you're curious about others, I mean, I'd love to chat to you, but, I think you're in good hands with anyone.
Can I just add something there?
Yeah.
One of my favorite Cindyisms is you measure someone's success not by when they're coasting, but how they clean up a mess. And I always say to clients, ask your agency, your clinic, ask anybody for any service you're going to use in life. What's your worst scenario? How did you handle it? What if this? What if that? And I can just say from my own experience of having to deal with difficult situations, and this is a human process, they always happen. Almost no one has a journey that just goes nice and smoothly. They're like this. I like to work with a team that will work with me to help you clean it up, fix it, support you throughout. And I know that with CFC, I get that. I get that with also other agencies. Leah said they're all great, but there
Yeah.
are some that I don't. There are some that I don't. So talk to me. Same with clinics. I know Create just has the infrastructure to manage outside monitoring, to have my clients do their testing in their local countries. So, without them having to call the clinic and going, how do I do this? How do I do that? It's too much anxiety. So you want an agency and a clinic that can really manage tough stuff.
And I
And
want to add to that. Yeah, and I want to add to that. CFC can handle donors and surrogates anywhere in Canada. They're so supportive of their donors. They're so supportive of their surrogates. They make sure that they get all the testing wherever they are. They're looked after if they have a problem. Of course, we have 24-hour day emergency lines if there's an emergency. But just some things are not emergencies, but they're so important in the process to make sure everything goes smoothly. And I think they're just so supportive of their intended parents and also their donors and surrogates, and that's really what sets them apart, I think.
thank you. That's great. I mean, we're all doing the same work. We all love our clients. We all have such an interest. And I will tell you, none of us are affiliated in that way. Like Cindy has to call me and say, hey, my parents have been waiting a long time, match them. Dr. Liebrecht calls me, I call him, I call Cindy. I think it's really important. So we have the embryos, we have the surrogate. She lives in Alberta. We as an agency, or your agency, or you, if you're managing this on your own, are going to find a spot to do some ultrasounds and some blood work leading up to the embryo transfer. She's going to travel to Toronto or they are going to travel to Toronto for the embryo transfer. And then how long, Dr. Liebrecht, when can they fly home? How do you take care of someone who lives in Alberta for the first 12 weeks, which I know is your sort of when you say goodbye to people?
That's a great question. Not only do we have people in all across Canada, but we have people international too, in the US, other countries as well, that come here and do their process, and we can easily help them. So the main thing about us is that we don't just say you're pregnant, okay, go see your doctor. Here at our clinic, and goes for just our regular fertility patients as well, is we feel that once somebody's pregnant, that's just the beginning, and we have to help them through the entire process. We don't go past the first trimester, which is really an important part of the pregnancy, but we can help them to get to that point when the chances of things going wrong are much, much less. So during the first trimester, if they live within a few hours of our clinic, they come here and we actually see them. We can provide ultrasound services. We can provide all the sort of care and management of their pregnancy at the beginning, and then set them off to their obstetrician or midwife that's going to look after their pregnancy. But if they are outside of the GTA, the Toronto area, far afield, like in Saskatchewan or BC or wherever they may be, I saw one surrogate from Newfoundland today, another one that was in Saskatchewan, another one that was in New Brunswick, so all over the country. Then we still look after them while they're in their first trimester, because there are specific things that are very pertinent to carrying a baby with surrogacy that are different than a regular pregnancy. So we are there to support them through that process with the medications they're on and so on. And if they ever have a problem, they can always reach out to us. And then once they reach a certain point in their pregnancy, then their own doctor or midwife will take over. So we pride ourselves in making sure that they get off to a really good start.
And I hear from intended parents that's the hardest day. when the surrogate leaves like the nest of create, that sort of that safety net, and the intended parents get to sort of be super involved, and then they're, working with their midwife or OB, and we, Dr. Liebrecht and I get on calls all the time, like, do you know anyone in Sudbury that's a great OB or midwife? Do you know anyone in this small town in Stony Plain, Alberta, or wherever the places are? We want to make sure that the doctors or midwives understand how delicate this process is. And for me, we do webinars for everyone. We talk to doulas, we talk to midwives around, who is the patient? The patient is the person carrying the baby. And how do intended parents stay involved, up to date, receive information from a medical provider when they live across the country or across the globe? And, working with an agency, that's something you would want to ask the agency, like, how will you help me with that inroad with the care provider? Because it's so important that you, as intended parents, yes, we're a surrogate-led program. Surrogates, pick you. Surrogates often will say which clinic they'd love to work with, and so we match them accordingly. And this is your pregnancy. So how do we include you to your comfort level at the times that you're comfortable with? And how do we help you build that relationship, when you're on Skype with her and she's eating McDonald's and you're a vegetarian who is an organic eater? Listen, your baby's fine. And, we know and create in their testing and their screening does test for toxicology. We want to make sure she's nicotine free. She's not using cannabis. She's, not using prescription drugs that she hasn't let us all know about. And we trust these people to be surrogates, and and through the process there's often a lot of conversations on the side about how we can make sure that she's getting some organic groceries in PEI where there are potatoes, and that's what she's eating. So how do we arrange that? How do we manage that for intended parents? And any agency will take care of that.
And we also do the toxicology testing on donors as well. We want to make sure she's not smoking cigarettes or taking drugs or any medication that could affect the egg. So I think we want to make sure that everything is as good as possible. I also want to mention that, some people of our surrogates are living in areas where there are multiple choices of hospitals, not just caregivers. And certain hospitals are better at looking after surrogates, even though it's more and more common nowadays. But I think they can give you advice in which hospital to go to as well.
Yeah, and I just want to say, Lee, at the end there, you said all agencies will do that kind of thing. I have to disagree with you. So I think intended parents need to ask their agency,
right?
Are you going to be able to help her get that organic food? Are you offering that service? What is included in that fee? And be wary of what may not be, what seems like a less expensive fee is less work.
Right. So there's a question for you, Dr. Liebrecht. It says, why does it take up to 6 months for the initial transfer after a match with the surrogate?
After a match?
I can answer that for you.
Okay. It normally doesn't take that long, to be honest.
No, I mean, I would say, if someone matches with a surrogate, we, the clinic, gets her in for screening, around her next period. So there's sort of could be a month there, just depending on when that match is confirmed. So we're at month 1. So, she gets in, and then she has to take up to 8 weeks to get back, a PAP right now. So then that's another 2 months. We're at 3. Then the medical screening, we get the all clear. She's good to go. Then you move into the legal contract, and that, could take 2 weeks. It could take up to a month if you have very specific criteria based on where you live in the world, right? So then we're at month 4, and then we wait for her period, which could be another month. That's 5. And then, it's a few weeks to get to that transfer. So we're at 5.5 months. And I think that, that's realistic. I mean, things may go quicker. She may have just had a PAP at her doctor and she sends Dr. Liebrecht those results. However, in my experience, with a lot of young birthing people, they haven't necessarily had a PAP in the last 2 years. It's so important that is completed. It's important that every check and balance is done. And if that means it's 6 months, that doesn't mean 6 months to achieve a pregnancy. That means 6 months to first transfer. And we know that all transfers aren't successful, and that IVF is like, half genius of a doctor, a bit of magic, a bit of this, a bit of that, and so we want to manage people's expectations around that, because, we can race, or we can walk, but we know we can walk a lot farther than we can run. Most of us, me for sure. And so we really want to make sure that every detail is tight, and that your surrogate is safe and she's able to move forward safely. You may do her screening and find out that her thyroid is elevated or slow, and Dr. Liebrecht says, hey, we're going to do this for a couple of months. And I have people often like, oh, it's putting things off for 2 months. If he didn't detect that and your surrogate got pregnant, we know the success rate would be lower. We know that it could put your pregnancy at risk. We know that it could put her health at risk. She may have to go back to her doctor because the PAP is abnormal and she needs to sort of investigate that. We know that you have been waiting for so long as intended parents, and everyone is working as quickly as possible. And so having a clinic that can work quickly with you and your gestational carrier to ensure everyone is healthy, everyone is ready to move forward, that your lawyer is like on speed dial, like we expect medical clearance to be ready next week. Are you in court? Are you available? Like all of those questions, so that that you're moving forward with that. We have 5 minutes left. Does anyone have any last questions? Please post them in the chat. Your questions have been fantastic. Also, we have a ton of webinars on Fertility Consultants page. fertilityconsultants.ca. Hope Springs Fertility Law is loading a bunch in the coming days or weeks, and on their amazing new website. Create is going to be loading some as well. So there's going to be a library of information for you. This is really just to give you a snippet of, I see there's no more questions, so I'm just going to talk about 12 weeks on. Once Create releases your surrogate, they're going to be seen by their care provider in their community. And my hope is that care provider is comfortable with you Skyping into appointments, which many are. You're going to stay connected and involved. Hopefully you'll be able to visit her throughout the pregnancy for an ultrasound, maybe 20-week, maybe 25-week fun 3D ultrasound. And then you're going to start working through a birth plan, birth preferences, with a coordinator from your agency, your surrogate, and yourselves, really talking about how you can be present at the birth. If there's a C-section, will it be her spouse? Will it be you? How you can craft a birth that is pure magic. Being a surrogate, having been at so many surrogate births, like watching people become parents, like it's ridiculous. It's so amazing. And doing it in, Cindy, you look like you're gonna cry. Stop it.
I've been that. I also want to say, when Dr. Liebrecht threw my surrogate and I out at 12 weeks, it was devastating.
It is devastating. Wow. It is. It's horrible. Wow.
Yeah. Oh wow, we just got into the next step.
Yeah. And so having an agency that's gonna sort of go through those questions around birth preferences, so that you're not showing up to the hospital and she's like asking for an epidural and you're like, what is an epidural? Like having that conversation with the coordinator, watching the doula webinars that we have all over the place, or that everyone sort of has all over the place, so that when you're preparing for birth, you have someone to like reach out to and go, I need an Airbnb. I need a bassinet. In Canada, the car seats are different. Can I use my car seat from Europe? No, you can't. All of those pieces. When should I come to Canada? Is 37 weeks too late? No. The average surrogate for 17 years, 37 weeks, 5 days is the delivery date on average. Might come early, and I might call you in the middle of the night saying, hey, your surrogate's in labor, get here. And my staff travels through the night sometimes to be with surrogates, and there's so much planning and beauty around the end. And then after, getting parentage, having guaranteed for your passport if you live outside of the country? How are you going to travel home? Do you feel safe on a plane? Would you rather drive 10 hours across the country? All of those details, having someone to just sort of bounce those ideas off of and really figure out how you're going to do that. During COVID, everyone got creative. It was amazing. And I have 2 more minutes. So the birth planning, the post-birth planning, that 4th trimester, how is your surrogate going to tuck in? How are we going to make sure she's okay? Because that is so important. Is she going to pump milk? Are you going to induce lactation? Are you going to formula feed? You know, what am I even talking about? You're just like in the planning stages? Absolutely. When you get to that point, having someone who isn't just responsible for your match, someone that's going to carry you through all of those times where you're like, I can't even put my feet on the friggin' ground because there is just too much to think about. Having someone who can bring that down for you and help you find, like, where are my feet? Where is my breath? Like, how am I going to do this? I've never seen a vagina. I'm a gay man. Well, you better buckle up, man. This is like real life in that delivery room. Like, I have seen people up against the wall. Like my intended father in my first journey, like he stayed up here because he just couldn't, like, and I loved that. And, people have gotten more brave. I feel like most intended parents are like right there, catching the baby, cutting the cord, like, skin to skin contact is beautiful and it's pretty wild. So that's all I have. Dr. Liebrecht, Cindy, any last comments before we say goodbye after that,
Yeah, make sure you retain your lawyer for the parentage application at around 25 weeks at the latest,
Yes.
please. We want to explain
Absolutely.
all those details, and we want an introduction. In our firm, we like to meet your surrogate so we can give her the same information so that she's not left out and she knows what to expect as well, what needs to be signed and when.
Yes. And that the letter goes to the hospital. The social worker knows you're coming. The lawyer does all that. We support with that. And making sure that the surrogate really understands that you are the parents. She is the surrogate, and, how that's going to be managed within the hospital and the care team there. Dr. Liebrecht, any last goodbyes, comments?
Just that we so pride ourselves in trying to provide the very best care we can for patients, including the intended parents, the donor, the surrogate. And I think it's so important, and we want to make your journey as easy as possible. Not everything is perfect, but we want to do the very best we can to provide that service. And we have amazing doctors and nurses here and all of our support staff. So we really want to make sure you have the best possible experience and the safest journey with a healthy baby at the end.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys, for joining us. Thank you, everyone who joined our webinar.
Leah, thank you for doing this.
Absolutely. And we will get this recording out to you with further information and ways to connect with all of us. So thank you so much.